Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to The Question. The Question is a live collaborative learning show committed to broadening your perspective on design systems. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, founder of Sparkbox and Redwoods Design System Community, and you're listening to the episode 074 Deep Dive with Kaelig Deloumeau-Pregent on the topic of AI and design system visibility. If you have a moment, please get subscribed to the show out at bencallahan.com/thequestion. Let's get into it. Kaelig, tell me a little bit about your background. I want to know what got you into design systems.
Well, first off, thank you so much, Ben, for having me. I think this world really needed a two bald bearded man show talking about systems.
Yes, perfect. We did it.
We did it. We made it happen. And I also want to commend you on the active listening that you show and you model through these sessions. It's just amazing. Like, I aspire to be as good of an active listener as you are.
It's very kind, Kaelig. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And a little bit about myself. So, I humble beginnings in the west of France. I started my career in a small web agency back in 2007. Before that, I was making websites since I was pretty little, and I just wanted to make stuff. And even when I didn't have the internet on my machine, I was making web pages and active desktop backgrounds, those kind of things. But anyway, so the thread towards design systems is that as I was at that web agency, the seed of efficiency and improving quality and craft project after project was already planted. I was looking at how do I, one project after another, never start from scratch again, because most websites are the same anyway. I think it's just there's a few pages, an about page, a contact form, those kind of things. But so I started creating systems and reusable bits already at that time. And then after 5 years at that web agency, I wrote a book about CSS and how SAS and Compass can help you. For those like OG design system people, that's going to seem familiar, but how do you get designers and developers to speak the same language thanks to various CSS architectural techniques? So from there, I felt like I'd been there, done that. I after 5 years of building sites day after day after day, emailing campaigns, those kind of things, I wanted to have a baby product that I could care for and I could put a lot of love into day after day. And so I moved to London, joined the BBC, and over there, for the first time in my life, interacted with a proper UX, like global design language team, and they were going through full responsive redesign. And they didn't have the primitives to think about responsiveness at the time. It was 2012, like it was very early stages of responsiveness. And so interacted with that team to build things like the grid, think about typography and how that scales across all screens. And I was hooked. I was like, okay, I've worked on style guides and component libraries, but this is, properly funded teams that do that full time. That's just amazing. And I could see, and then there's a few also CSS architectural techniques that I implemented there that are now still being used at BBC across all of BBC. Then The Guardian was looking at what I was doing at BBC. They're like, come on over. We're going to do the same thing. But then over there, I got a taste of shipping a lot faster. And so how do you ship faster, but also improve craft and quality? Again, there's ways of doing design systems that help with that. And then Financial Times was looking at that, and they were like, hey, if we had a fully funded team, would you like to join? And so I ended up on a properly funded design system team over there. They were very engineering driven, and the connection with design was something to be mended. So I joined in, and I fixed that relationship between design and engineering. And then my wife moved to California, so I thought I might as well follow her because I love this woman. Why not? And joined Salesforce to work on the Lightning design system. Shout out to Gina, who asked me the question. I was just visiting town, and she was like, "So you're going to be looking for a job, right?" It's like, at some point. Next thing you know, I have an offer from Salesforce. Back in those days, like just offers were raining from the sky. Good times. And then after a couple years there, where like the scale of design systems at Salesforce is unfathomable. Like it was one of the first flagship design systems out there, and again, it got me hooked. Then I moved to Shopify, that was shipping way faster than a Salesforce, with different problems to solve. And there I founded the UX tooling team, where I worked on all the things that have to do with DevOps for design systems. So the end-to-end shipping pipelines over there. And then after 5 years, I was like, I've been there, done that. Design systems are nice, but it's kind of the same thing over and over again. So I moved to platform engineering, and I wanted to work on developer tooling. So I moved to Netlify, and they hired me. Funny enough, they hired me thinking I was going to help them build design systems. And I was like, no. You're doing things like the way you're thinking systemically already is great. Don't over invest in design systems. So we can double click on that later for folks who are interested on the why. Somebody like me would say, why would you do more design systems? And then I moved to Intuit, back to my love for design systems, with lots of investments towards AI over there. And I wanted to see what the interplay between AI and design systems and agentic workflows looked like. And then as of about a month ago, actually maybe exactly a month ago, I left Intuit and back on the job market and having fun, speaking to other people. I was very caffeinated during my trip in San Francisco. I can tell you that. Lots of coffee chats, lots of very interesting insights that people have been sharing. So excited to be here. And sorry, that was a bit long, but
it's perfect. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. It's funny because I think I would imagine if I asked everybody here on the call to raise their hand if this part of your story aligns with their part, we would get a lot of hands. And that is that I didn't even know design systems were a thing. I just am a systems thinker, and I was working systematically, and it sort of emerged into a career, And so I think that's cool to hear from you, Kaelig, somebody that a lot of us have looked up to, and your work with the design tokens community group and all of that has been influential, and appreciate you and your generosity with your knowledge. So thanks for being here. Gosh, we had a fun conversation leading up to this, and we talked a lot about AI and options for things that we could ask. I know that's something you've been experimenting a lot with, Kaelig, in reading some of your most recent writings. We ended up, you told me this story, which I'll just recount quickly here. You said in 2016, you were at a symposium for design systems when I think you were at Salesforce at the time. And you went to, a bunch of larger design system teams were there. And to close the day, somebody asked, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you'd change? And your answer back then was tracking, wanting more visibility, more discoverability, just more understanding of how your components are being used. And it sounds like that's still something that you're after today. And when we go to look at the data, we'll see that like a lot of people are still after that. So, but with that as sort of some context, we landed on 4 questions. The first question was, how would you describe your current level of visibility into how your design system assets are actually being used across disciplines, including their use by AI? And we gave folks 4 options and an other, or an NA. We asked, as AI agents and automation tools produce more content, design, and code at scale, what are your biggest design system concerns? And allowed folks to select from many options from a few. We asked, how has your feeling about the right balance between design system enforcement and enablement shifted as AI enters the picture, and kind of gave them sort of like a scale to choose from. And then one last open text question. If you could instantly implement one thing today to improve visibility into how your system is actually being used without becoming the design police, what would it be and why? And so we got so many great answers, as we always do. We sent this out to 1,081 design system practitioners. We got 78 responses. And wherever you're listening or watching to this, or here on the live call, you can click this link to go see the raw data for yourself. I had a ton of fun digging into it this week. I was really, really kind of looking for some interesting correlations. I'll just say, too, that this is a small data set, as it is every episode for us, right? So don't think of these things as statistically significant signals, but more as kindling for a good conversation. I don't know. What were you expecting to see in this first one, Kaelig? Anything in particular?
I would have been surprised if people had said we've got robust automated tracking. And I've seen some teams do it with some interesting techniques, but I haven't seen it talked about very much, or even the tooling that goes around this, that like the design system tooling products out there that try to achieve that. It's a bit tough. So yeah, I'm not super surprised. I'm glad that the trend is more towards that second answer. We have some manual processes or partial tooling. That makes sense to me. Like this is where I think I've seen most of the teams I was on be around.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. We didn't think about it like this, but there's probably a scale of maturity in this, right? Like you start here with no visibility. It's a black box and you sort of move up through these. It's interesting that one of the challenges here was called out, I think, in one of the answers, or in a category of answers right here, which is that I think what we're looking for is more than what some of the tools that have been on the market, things like Omelet, which if you haven't seen has just been open sourced by Zeppelin. So that's something for us to unpack. But that was primarily code focused, right, in terms of metrics of use and that kind of thing. So I think folks are looking for more cross-channel, like what are designers doing? What are UXers doing? What are developers, product folks, content folks? So that's a tough challenge when the context of all the organizations where we work are so different, but maybe there's some space there for some cool products.
Sorry to interject, Ben. There's another layer to this, which is the end customer. Because as a design system team, typically your users are very internal folks. But then what about their users? So the end customer of whatever your company's product is are going to be experiencing those components or not. And so a component could be very, very much somewhere in the code, but nobody ever sees it. On the end side. That happens a lot with technical debt, zombie code that hasn't been cleaned up. And then you don't know if you can deprecate a component as a design system team unless you know if it's going to impact the end use, the actual end user, not just the developers using it.
Yeah, that's a good call out. The other two, this one, the second question was about, what are your kind of biggest concerns? And it was just basically like all of them. It's kind of how I read the answer. I did do some interesting pulling of the data to see, did people choose only one of these when they could choose multiple? And I looked at sort of how they answered the last question based on that. And so I'll share some of that a little later. But you can see some of the interesting quotes here from things. I did love, I think it was Brandon that gave us this optimistic view. So we positioned this and said, what are you concerned with? But Brandon was like, I see this list as a laundry list of things that AI and more robust infrastructure are going to solve. So it was like a positive spin on the question, which I thought was really kind of cool. Brandon is the ultimate optimist. I don't know, Brandon, if you're here, but thanks for sharing that one. The last one, again, more like a spectrum, was pretty balanced again. And so folks from like strong enforcement, a move towards strong enforcement versus a move towards strong enablement. It's interesting though, because there was a good number of folks who said other here, 14%. And I was just thinking, if you have 14% of people resist answering and take the time to write an answer, what are they saying? And so most of those, I think I would say, were leaning towards the idea of, I want to do both. I want some more enforcement, but I also want it to feel like people are being enabled. And so that's an interesting tension I think we'll have to unpack. Okay, folks, this is the moment, right? This is a long intro today because there are lots of questions, but I just want to encourage you, raise your hand if there's a specific topic you want to get into. We'll get you on. You can unmute and jump into the conversation. Kaelig, any place in particular that you want to start?
Yeah, it's funny. So on Donnie's show yesterday, I think Brad talked about the fog of war, and that's a metaphor I've been using in a piece I'm writing right now as well. That comes from real-time strategy games, where as a player, well, first of all, those games are games of incomplete knowledge. So you don't know what the opponent, the enemy, is doing. You don't know what's happening outside of what your army can see. And of course, this is we're not going to use war metaphors too much for design systems because it's a team sport. But the idea that you build something, but then you don't necessarily know what happens on the edges of how product is built. That's something that I hold dear to, like how I think, because I was playing a lot of StarCraft in my days, and the way you can make bets based on that incomplete knowledge, the way you prioritize where you spend your attention. There's a lot that can be derived from that thinking, and I'm curious about how people think about this now that you could potentially have a surveillance state of design systems.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's one of the fears of AI for society in general. Like, it's if our powers, the powers that be, have unlimited enforcement power, where is freedom? Where lies, some amendments, if you're in the US, might be violated. And the same thing, like if you have your designers and developers feeling under the pressure of conforming to your system at all times because they're being surveilled, where does creativity go? And so what you're gaining as a systems team in visibility and enforcement, are you losing something else at the same time? And I'm curious about how people think about this, if they have.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, what a great question and a great place for us to start. So folks, how do you feel about this idea of visibility for us as systems practitioners, perhaps leading to a feeling of, pressure to conform because of surveillance or that sort of thing? So thanks, Kaelig, for that. Peter, jump right in.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another dimension of that kind of idea, which is with AI and design systems, folks able to kind of enable themselves to kind of go over people's work. Like, where's the ownership of it all at the same time? So, like, in the same way that there's a concern about like being overwatched by, um, you know, all these entities about whether you're doing the right thing or not. You have equally the ability for someone to kind of overwrite your work anyway. So if it's not conforming, well, it's like, oh well, I feel like conforming it. So there's lots of opportunities for everyone to write over each other's work. So really, kind of the solution to that more is kind of cultural contracting, at least within an organization standpoint. I can't really speak to kind of the efficacy of it for like the general public, but within an org, you have just as much right to kind of oversee something as you do to overwrite something. To kind of, I feel like that kind of counterbalances the scales a little bit now.
Kaelig, do you want to respond to that?
The idea that something will overwrite your work so it conforms makes you change your behavior to conform by default, is what you're saying, Peter?
Not quite. I mean, I think there's just kind of there's going to be a natural tension where you have people that want to align with systems for whatever reason, then you have people that don't want to align with systems for whatever reason, and you have the opportunity for both sides to be able to kind of overlap each other's work. Where someone's like, well, no, this should be part of the system, so I'm going to overwrite it. Oh, this shouldn't be part of the normal system, or this is unique, so I should overwrite it. So like, doesn't the natural kind of positioning of those kind of antithetical forces kind of neutralize each other to some degree?
Yeah, okay. So that's where we start. Okay, so my thoughts on this is that there's going to be a level of helpfulness from those tools. Like, if you ignored that they because there was no training or documentation was poor, but there's a pattern that was already available for you to use, and it does the same thing than what you just designed from scratch. Having a little Clippy helpful thing to tell you, hey, by the way, like, you should probably use the system here. Very convenient. And for the system to have visibility over this as well, it's kind of nice because they can be like, oh, we missed the mark on documentation or training because that person obviously didn't know. That said, for people to feel empowered and have the agency to deviate from the system when the system is just not providing the best user experience, we need escape hatches. So I'm hoping that people who are building those surveillance state machines also train people to know when, how, why to deviate from the system, and don't make it look like they're failing at their jobs for deviating from the system, but rather that they understand the user need better than the system would have. And in fact, that it's an opportunity for the system to learn from this instead of enforce. But that's my, I don't know, blue sky view of this.
Kaelig, that showed up in the data pretty clearly, actually. When I read through things, there was a connection. I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked out, but it was basically that there was this desire to use, so folks who were strong on the enforcement side were not talking about it in the sense of like policing. It was all about learning and understanding. And it was the feedback loop idea of like, hey, if I don't have the data for how this is used, I can't actually mature the system in the way that's valuable to the consumers. And so, this is, again, now we're getting at this idea of like, well, if you have the power to do all of that tracking and have all that visibility, you say you're going to use it for good now. Can we trust that you will in the future, right? So maybe there's something to unpack there. Doug, jump in.
I'm just curious, is this resistance to tracking and enforcement a designer thing? And the reason I say that is devs, we intentionally put linting tools in PR reviews, and we just put as much structure in place as we possibly can so we stay on the rails. So the more guide rails there are, and we know when to break them, and we know the ones that, oh, this one doesn't make sense in this situation. But to me, all of this sounds like great. Like the more feedback I can get that I'm on track, the better. I'm just curious, is it more of a design concern that stifles creativity at the point that you need to be creative? If my question hopefully makes sense.
Yeah. Greg, do you have a new thread, or are you responding to Donnie or to Doug? Sorry.
I'm responding. Did I do it right?
Yep. No, that's a green, but go for it.
Damn it.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I'm still adapting.
No
so I think the development perspective here is something that design needs to start to adapt to, especially with AI. Like even today, I was in a meeting where we were talking about work that we were trying to collaborate on very closely because we were like building it rules that AI was going to use to make skills and for us to work on the website documentation, right? And I think where that kind of dovetails into this is that we were realizing that we needed to kind of all start to work in a similar way. And I think that's an evolution that's going to start to happen as we're all starting to use AI more. We're going to have to actually have ways to work together that work better. And I think the reason there's probably a strong sort of designer reaction to the rigidity or the change is that the first instinct is that, oh, this is going to apply everywhere to everything, and then I'm going to feel restricted. When I think what we have to think about is, okay, this is good for this set of things, and then we still have room to do more free and open things in this way. And I think that's where we have to kind of figure out how better to drill down on, okay, well, which one is it here? And start to get more, the term I've been using is disciplined. Like we're in the age of AI, we all have to get more disciplined about how we do certain things. That doesn't mean everything has to be super disciplined because, then you feel like you lose a little bit of the magic of the creative process maybe. But the creative process in and of itself is like if you look at it certain ways, is a very loose framework for how to go do things.
Yeah.
And you have to have the right amount of structure and the right amount of space.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's interesting. I just want to also call out that we did not actually see in the data, we don't have any demographic information about who was answering in these. So we don't know if it was designer or developer. So that was a question from Doug, not a statement that designers feel this more. I do think the tension that I have heard, and we have asked this in the past in other episodes, the tension that I've heard, the concern that I've heard from designers, and you've probably heard this before, around systems has always been a little bit more of like, let me do my job. Don't squash my creativity. So maybe that's kind of what I'm hearing you ask about, Doug. I do think this framing in this answer, which I've got pulled up on my screen, was really nice. I'm going to read this because I think it was a really well stated answer. The most useful thing would be lightweight embedded signal collection at the point of consumption rather than at the point of review. I love this idea. If contributors and consumers could flag uncertainty or deviation in context without it feeling like a compliance checkpoint, you'd surface real usage patterns before they compound into systemic drift. The goal is to make visibility a byproduct of normal workflow rather than a separate audit process that nobody has time for. I thought that was a really smart way to think about this, like baking this into the process, and it reminded me of some of the stuff that Pega has been working on. So she's got this concept of a product called Magnolia, which is like tracking deviations, giving it the responsibility to the person who's deviating to sort of like state their authority for deviation, right, in the moment, as they make a change. And so those things are captured, right, as the designer, in this case, the designer is working in whatever tooling they're in. So awesome conversation so far, folks. Where do we want to go here? This is great so far. Kaelig, any other thoughts on the direction here?
No, I like where Greg was going with this. The idea that there's discipline that developers are putting in place. And in fact, what Magnolia seems to be doing is what we've been doing with StyleLint and ESLint. And there's a way to force developers to state why they're deviating. So whenever you have a rule that you're breaking in code, there's an escape hatch. You can say StyleLint disable or ESLint disable, and that linter will stop throwing warnings and errors at you. And then after you write the disable comment, you can force people to put a little comment, a human language comment, where they will be explaining the context of why they would be doing this. And having that in design, that seems so useful that it's part of your practice, and that data could be super useful for design system folks as well. I like it. I really like that.
Jeff, what's going on, man?
Yeah, this is kind of a continuation on, the visibility and like audits that nobody has time for. I've been thinking about this through the lens of like, how do we look at adoption, and how do we communicate that best to leadership? I think if I look at the attempts in the past, leadership wants to understand, is this successful? How successful is it? A lot of the attempts at analytics and metrics are tooling and trying to track things so that we can report it up to leadership. And a lot of times that stalls because it's larger effort than the investment. I think AI is going to be able to handle a lot of that going forward. The idea that I had recently was, when you look at the curve of, how do we measure this success? You have through the lens of adoption, there's generally a spike up front because it's going to take product teams a little bit longer to adopt these things. It's a new workflow. It's additional work to what they're normally used to. But that productivity curve is going to go up exponentially over time. And how do we best track that? Yeah, you can do it, and AI is going to be able to help a lot with this through tooling. I'm looking at it now through, how do I build the relationships so that when that occurs, like if we're successful, that exponential increase in productivity is going to occur on all of these product squads. How do I build a relationship with the individuals so that when they feel the value, like it was really, really helpful, I'm in a position to capture that and like create just like a case study, or like, those are the moments where I want to make sure I have a visibility into how do I get a snapshot of that, so that we can communicate that to leadership, because that's something that AI is not going to be able to realistically capture in the near future. And those are the real wins that, I feel like are most going to resonate with leadership. And it's going to take a lot less time for me to figure out how to set it up on the the tooling side.
Yeah. Alexander, I see that green check mark.
Yeah, it was more like to some points that you made some time ago, around the sort of policing or like tooling, like the quote that you said about like capturing like stuff. I don't remember. Yeah, the lightweight thingy. Like, well, first off, I guess when it comes to the policing versus like librarian kind of thingy, I guess it depends on which level of the system you're at. Like at a token level, of course, I think we would want to police, and like the higher you go up, like the less you want to police and the more you want to be a librarian, in my opinion. But what I was thinking about this, like something I had on my mind a long time is like, if in code we can have better tooling to sort of identify patterns, right? And like place them sort of at like some sort of percentile that like, if it's at like the 0 percentile, like 1 percentile, it means it's probably the design system, right? We know that it's the design system component. It matches exactly the code, the way it's structured. It is the design system. And maybe like you are able to identify things that are at like the 5 or 10 percentile, like they're very like similar to what we have in a design system, and being able to then like inform the maker that this is existing. Maybe you didn't know. But also the other way, like maybe there are a bunch of scattered things across the product that all are quite similar. They're like 95% similar. It would be so great to have visibility on that, to see that, hey, all of these things are like really quite similar based on the code we have. Like I would like a tool that can surface those to my team up front and give me a report, or I can go and browse, right, and say, hey, what would it look like if we took all of these and merged them into one thing and systemized it and then migrated into that? And I think like maybe even something where there's like a matrix of like what are the closest matches and how many occurrences of these do we find in the system, to be able to see like what are really, really strong candidates, like a lot of occurrences that are very similar to each other versus like more snowflakey stuff that are sort of emerging patterns. Like if someone can build that for me, let me know.
Yes, please.
I'll ask Claude.
And this discussion happened, this almost exact discussion happened between Donnie and Brad yesterday. So it's so funny. But I agree. Yes, please, somebody build this. Love it, Alexander.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Pedro.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Alex already mentioned a bit where I was going to ask, but even on the design side, I usually like to say that when we have designers that, you know, detach components or don't follow a pattern, rather than police them, I'll prefer to understand why they're doing that, and using this metric to just like drive us to the direction where, oh, probably the product needs other kind of things that we are not covering now, and this is an opportunity for us. But even like in terms of code point of view, sometimes it happens as well in terms of the culture that we need to adapt, that it's still not adapting to the new ways of building systems. So my conclusion is I like to see these exceptions, not as like, oh, it's super bad thing, you are not following what we have, but more like, oh, this is an opportunity for us to understand why people are not following, because everyone will be in great position when we're following this, so they might have a really good reason for not following, and things get easier when we start from that and people start to share more. So I like to see this other side of like, more than police, it's more like, so it's a confession room, like, oh, you can tell me what's happening here, and we find a solution.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Pedro. It's such a positive take on all this. I'll also just call out here, there was a really interesting correlation. This is related to what we've been covering, between questions, the way folks answered question 1 and the way that they answered question 4. So I worked with Claude a little bit here to kind of, after anonymizing the data, map the answers to question 4, which was the enforcement versus enablement, against the answers to question 1, which was amount of visibility. And you can kind of see this story here of like folks with less visibility on the bottom of these rows are looking for more enforcement in the way that they answered, right? And so as you gain visibility, as you move up this set of these layers from very little visibility to informal to, you know, partial to robust, there's a much more, the people are moving more towards, they want significant enablement is kind of what they want. And so I'm not quite sure what to do with this data yet, but it's a really interesting pattern that's very, very clear when you map it out like this. So interesting to see that.
I've seen this a lot, and probably you as well in all of your the teams you've been talking to, is the maturity scale is typically you build a design system at first because there's so much entropy and chaos in your UI that you want to get to a good space, where things sort of look the same and you get some efficiencies from it. And then as you move up, you're like, oh, wait, what have I done? Like everything now looks the same, even when it shouldn't. And this is to go back to Jasenia's article, The Plateau of Sameness, that is so good at explaining like the kind of how the design system kicks back. And there's another talk I want to point to. It's The Design System Always Kicks Back by Kyle Peet, who also was a design system leader at Shopify. Incredible talk about the pitfalls, all the failure modes. Once you start scaling, the kind of stuff that just bites you. And there are problems that you don't encounter until you have reached a certain level of success and maturity. And then you have to kind of backtrack and go back to first principles on a few of those.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's a pendulum, right? That swings, It's like you tighten, you loosen, you tighten, you loosen, and hopefully over time you find a good balance. But Stephen, what's up? New thread? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. ToniAnn's got a green check mark. ToniAnn, you got a continuation?
Yeah, sorry. Just stuck in there last minute.
Yeah, do it. Raise your
I'm
hand,
just looking
Stephen.
at this, I like this correlation. It's really interesting, but it also just, I don't know, this feels to me very human, right? Like the less visibility you have, the more easy it is to make assumptions about why people are doing things, and just over indexing on the assumption, like there must be no reason for these deviations. This should be so simple, because you don't know the conversations behind it. You don't know the constraints. You don't know what the product manager is pushing back on the designers for. And so the more I've learned in any systems role, when I'm able to talk to people, the more I'm able to appreciate their thinking when sometimes it's not there. Sometimes it is just a miss, but when it's there around why they haven't used the design system. And so those moments for me become more about like, okay, how can I help you? How can I have these better discussions around like critical thinking? And when it's not there, it just seems really easy to just reach for that enforcement tool and just want that because it just feels really chaotic. So I don't know, it just feels like a very human problem to have this type of correlation show up here.
What a great observation. And it's so true. It's like the solution to so many of our problems is talk to people. It's just like, go talk, sit down. Yeah. Thanks, ToniAnn. Stephen, a continuation. Thanks for the switch up.
Yeah. Sorry. Still getting used to the green checks.
No problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think, what ToniAnn just mentioned kind of is in line with what I was going to say originally. I think, this stuff is the enforcement. I think it's a very human thing, right? Because I think people lean on that because it's very human to just want to have some, to have more flexibility to do what you want, I think, in a lot of situations. And I think people will come to us and say things like that and be like, well, if I need to follow these guidelines more, like, can you put something in place that helps enforce that? Because people are creative and they want to go off in different directions. That's, I think, completely natural for people to want to do.
Yeah.
I think in the age of AI, this is flipping a little bit, right? And that's where I see it moving more to enablement, because now, our users are coming to us and say, can you just like enable us to do this with AI? We'll follow your guidelines and do what you want, but like the AI has to output the things in the right way. Right. So I think, it seems like the enablement is starting to push on these threads a little bit more.
Yeah.
With AI. And I think even with this analytics and getting visibility into stuff, we've kind of shifted our thinking into trying to understand, not so much anymore like why did a human diverge from the system, but why did an AI agent diverge from the system?
Yeah.
We've started thinking about it that way because, the output is going up dramatically, right? So really, like any data you might have collected on usage before AI is almost not as useful anymore, in my opinion, because you're going to see a huge curve in terms of the amount of stuff that's being created. And people aren't going to look at it, right? So if AI is not doing it right, your problem is going to get exponentially worse. As people diverge. So
yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Robin, you got a continuation?
I was thinking about like the enforcement enablement, because one thing that maybe I'm thinking is that like right now, like for example, in the way it's visualized, it seems like they are two competing things. It's either one or the other. And I'm thinking that, I mean, actually in systems, because it's such a complex topic, you have both and they are like intertwined. Like you have enablement in some areas, but then you enforce others. And then that's always a discussion. What in a team, in a company specifically, you want to probably define what do we want to enforce, what do we want to, and when do we want to enable? Like where are the areas where we want to be more strict versus more flexible? And I think, yeah, like I think that the maybe seeing them as either or it might be wrong to probably it's the discussion. It depends, like you enforce what and you enable what, like because sometimes in the case of designers, like you can give designers freedom, but you maybe agree that you enforce them in a certain color palette. So like in a way, you give them total freedom, but you say, but use these colors. So is that enablement or enforcement? It's like a mix of the two, right? Because you would say, go ahead and think like Greenfield, like don't follow our components, but follow our tier 1 tokens, for example. So you enforce a certain area of the system, but you enable that. And so you can play around with this scale in many different things. So it can be, I think it can be both. And it's a discussion that teams have to have.
That's a good point, Robin. This is something I keep finding myself coming back to, which is that I believe the system needs to be really flexible to allow for anything, but we have to build into our cultures the desire for people to make really good choices, right? It's like pushing the choice to the end users, but basically like creating a culture where it's like, hey, we are all working towards the same thing. We want the same things. That's really hard work. That's like years long work, but that's, I think, in my mind, the healthiest approach here, so that people don't feel policed. They're like, I'm just doing what we do. This is how we work, you know? Greg, what's up?
So, one of the things that I've been thinking about with this is, as I'm starting to like work with skills and doing stuff to that's kind of on the that is a mixture of like enablement and enforcement in a way, is I'm noticing that there is a opportunity to try to bake in, oh, we have a rule for this thing. It is sort of this level of strictness or flexible. We have to define that so AI can look at it and see how it should be thinking. But it's also sort of an inflection point to be like, hey, like stop and ask the human that's using the AI to acknowledge, hey, I want to break this rule or I want to stick with this rule. Like there's either an opportunity to have that built in, or for AI to just steamroll and like change. Say you're trying to adapt a design into code and you're trying to do that workflow. Well, it'll just change a bunch of things if it just follows all the rules. It'll change your design to like match the rules without even telling you that it's changing stuff. So there's an opportunity in these types of situations to like build in a layer where it goes, hey, I'm going to deviate from what you did. Here's what I did. Or here, let me ask you if you want to deviate, those kinds of things. And, what's interesting about that too is that those opportunities weren't there before, because if you don't see the guidance, you don't know about it. You don't know you're doing something that maybe someone's thought about before. You're just using your instinct, uninformed of, a greater context that you're supposed to be aware of. So in some ways that's kind of cool and exciting, but also in some ways, like how we architect those things can become more enforcement or enablement, depending on how you present those opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Greg. I remember from our last episode with Davey, we had sort of like two extremely different views of the sort of human in the loop role. And one of those was very much like, hey, what you're describing, Greg, along the way, give me checks. I want to make sure that everything's going well. I'm in the loop in a regular sort of cadence of iteration. And the other was just do the stuff and show me at the end and I'll give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And those are like very different approaches, right? And maybe we need some of both, but that was an interesting idea that we pulled from last episode. Any other thoughts? We've got just a couple minutes left, and then we will be wrapping up here. Danita, do you want to ask that out loud, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, I can ask it, I guess. So I was asking what level of accountability should the person who's creating the thing have on whether or not the AI is conforming to the design system? Is it all on the design systems team to check it? Like, I feel like the first level is the person who's like, if we're enabling people, they should have some accountability to like at least notice glaring mistakes.
Yeah. Kaelig, thoughts?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's tough because design system teams typically it's passionate people who really want other builders to build awesome stuff, and you need to have visibility over what those folks are doing and how they're using your system to understand how you can even further improve how they're building. But it really depends on the talent pool you're serving. If you're serving AI agents who are poorly trained, or if you're serving very junior designers who have maybe very little experience building product, then you need more oversight. But if you're at a company that hires only top design talent, then you need to give them a lot more trust and empowerment. Otherwise, that talent is just going to move on. Like they want to build cool stuff, and they know how to do their jobs extremely well. So it depends, as as it always is. But yeah, trying to put that cursor in the right spot is important. And I think in high trust cultures, there are some choices that are way easier to make than in low trust ones. In low trust cultures, you need a lot of policing, a lot of visibility, and if you think that, yeah, it depends on how you think about design as well as a company. Is it something that you have to do so that there is some sort of alignment step at some point during the product development lifecycle? And it feels like you couldn't do it. The cost of doing it in code would be so high that you need to have Figma somewhere at some point, or a design tool as to sketch out those ideas. Or can you get closer to production very early on, in which case the role of the design system, the role of designers shifts. And then I don't know how much. Yeah, we're on the towards the end of the call here. One thing that people have been bringing up to me is there are some things you don't want to compromise on, and that's things like accessibility or enforcement becomes a lot higher stakes, especially in regulated environments. And yes, you can give a very long leash to people, to designers and developers when it comes to those things when they're prototyping. But when it comes to shipping to production, all of a sudden, you need visibility, you need enforcement. And people might also might be ignorant of those best practices. Like it's not very well taught. It's accessibility is super hard. It's not like a checkbox. You just check and ship. So there's a spectrum of where you want your enforcement to be. I think somebody said earlier, maybe the token level, the foundational level, is where you need to have a lot of enforcement, and as you go up the stack, a lot less.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't think we have a definite answer on all of these things.
Don't.
But this is super interesting. I'm going to keep digging into the data.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a piece about the fabric of design systems in the age of AI right now, and what it means to be a design system practitioner. So all of these questions, that was just me fishing for a lot of information and context. I'm so thankful that folks came up with.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaelig. We are going to wrap up here. There's 2 questions in the Fig Jam, these yellow stickies towards the top right. If you have a moment, jump in, drag a sticky note up and drop your answer. I would love to continue to see those. And as we're wrapping, just a couple quick announcements. There's tons of stuff from the Redwoods community here. These folks are always writing. We're always sharing what we're learning. So come down and check out some of these. Also, the Redwoods community has been working on a concept called the Redwoods Compass, which is a tool to help you and your systems team just better create conversation and dialogue around some of the areas where you could use improvement or where you're doing well. So there's a sort of an alpha launch of this out here, and we're looking for folks to test that and then to sign up to do a little qualitative interview with the folks who are running that. Robin is on the call here. He's been helping lead that charge. So if you're interested in that, we'd love to get your feedback there. And then I'm really excited to sort of officially announce that at Config in June, we have 2 sponsors who've stepped up to help us make a Redwoods community hike happen. So you don't have to be in Redwoods to attend, but you can click this link here to get on the list. There's a limited number of spots available for this. We're going to go to Muir Woods, which is where the coastal redwoods, the massive coastal redwoods are. So if you're going to be in SF for Config, please consider joining us. We would love to see you there. Even if you're not going to Config, you can still come hang out. So get on that list and we'll keep you posted. And massive thanks to Sparkbox and to Brad and the SouthLeft crew who have got their new AI and design systems course coming up soon. Please click these links to go visit their sites and let them know you appreciate the support. That's all we've got time for today, folks. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your generosity with your knowledge, and I'm sorry that we've run a little long today. Kaelig, you rock, buddy. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. See you all soon. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Question. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective on your design system program, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's more information about my coaching and consulting offerings over on the website. And if you need a hand building a sustainable design system program, my studio Sparkbox is standing by, ready to partner. Reach out and let's see if there's a good fit. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.